Good morning, buenos dias. We were just saying we think we're ready to start class a whole 2 minutes early. So thank you for everyone for being here. As I know it's the last day and there's always competition. I know there's like screenings in other places, films and all that. So thank you for joining us for a discussion today on a panel on the pursuit of equity, redesigning higher education in a digital world. And I'm Elizabeth González, the Chief Program and Strategy Officer for College Futures Foundation, which is a California statewide private philanthropy focused on equitable post-secondary attainment for economic mobility. And so welcome everyone to California, because I feel like I can do that. But I'm really excited to be in this conversation with an incredible panel. So I'm going to briefly introduce each of them. They all have an amazing bio that you can read in their app. And so I'm joined to my left by Michele Siqueiros, the president of the Campaign for College Opportunity. And next to her is Michael Smith, the Erik Jonsson Professor of Information and Technology and Policy at Carnegie Mellon. And to his left is Maria Anguiano, the Executive Vice President of Learning Enterprise at Arizona State University. And rounding us out is Stephen Green, the Chief Partnerships Officer at Noodle. So what we really hope today is you really see a diversity of perspectives, of thinking, but a real shared commitment to this question is what is possible in the digital era with respect to really creating more accessible, equitable, affordable higher education. You know, when we were prepping for this call, we all said, you know, clearly we're all here because the current system, as it was designed, generally worked for most of us, or we actually had to do several things to make it work for us. And on a personal level, I entered this conversation as a first-generation student, a daughter of immigrants. And I remember when I got into this field, I used to say, I want to make sure my story is possible. And as of late, and I think you know that, Maria, we talk about this, is I've been complicating that question because I want to make sure that it is continuing to be accessible, a particular model, so that we really do have a diverse set of opportunities. But I also know that there are different kinds of learners, and I've learned that more personally and more deeply in the last several years. And so now the question is, actually, can we reimagine a post-secondary system that has various access points, that invites different kinds of learners? And so that's what's really animating hopefully our conversation today, which is what does the digital era provide for us? What is the opportunity with respect to access, but what's our responsibility to ensure that system actually enables economic opportunity for democracy? So this is really going to be a conversation about both and, not either or. So let's bring it. We're going to do that. And so what we hope in that conversation as we begin it is to really think about not just questions of delivery, pedagogy, and instruction, you know, different models, and each one of them can speak to this, but really have a conversation that interrogates some questions about what are those core assumptions about higher education quality, exclusion, brand, high price, a residential experience, instruction by researchers with a PhD, the mission of higher education, whose is it, for whom is it, offering a vision of higher education that is more abundant and less about managing for scarcity. So abundance, you're going to hear about that today. And then lastly, engage in this conversation. Does digital modality offer this opportunity for abundance of quality and therefore education? So that's a high, tall order clap at the end if we actually met that. So I'm gonna start us off with Michele. And Michele, you know, your work at the Campaign for College Opportunity has really driven a vision and an action agenda around access, greater access, and equity. And more recently, your organization has been producing so much important research that says higher education, while still a belief that it is an enabler of mobility and opportunity, it also continues to exclude. So I would love your voice to kind of set the table about what is the current state, you know, of education, of higher ed.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. you know, like Elizabeth, I come to this work as a first-gen college grad. I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm the daughter of immigrants. My mother only had a 6th grade education, so college was absolutely the pathway for me to opportunity, to privilege, to being in a space like this room. And so I'm really passionate about higher education, and for 20 years I've led the Campaign for College Opportunity now with a real focus on not just access to college and higher education, but completion, and an explicit attention to closing racial equity gaps, and to be very intentional about what is happening. Now, I focus on California. California, as you all know, is an incredibly diverse place. Our public higher education system is the largest in the world. Community colleges, over 115 community colleges, 23 Cal State universities, the biggest, you know, open access university system, the biggest UC system of Research One institutions, and a commitment in California generally since the 60s that anybody that lived in this state should have the opportunity to go to college and afford that opportunity. Now, those are all great things. We also have one of the best financial aid systems in the state, Cal Grant, which essentially ensured that I could go to college. I grew up low income. I only went to Pitzer College because they gave me the best financial aid package of all the campuses that I applied to and got into. That is how first-gen students make decisions about college. What is the bottom line? And this year, we are watching students not be able to make those choices because of the FAFSA debacle that has happened nationwide. So we have a trifecta of things affecting student access this year. The still ongoing impact of COVID, the Supreme Court decision to ban race-conscious admissions in higher education, and now a FAFSA debacle that will ensure that fewer students that are talented, like me and you, were when we applied to college, may not get that opportunity. So I'm especially frustrated, angry, challenged about all of that. I will say that, you know, what I find so interesting is that, you know, how many of you in this space believe in equal opportunity? Stand up, stretch. Stand up. Do you believe in equal opportunity to higher education? I do too, but I'm not standing. And what's interesting to me is that two things can be so true, right? That generally in any room, everybody will say we believe in equal opportunity to higher education, and yet we design systems that ensure that we do not have equal opportunity to higher education. You know, if you're poor, if you don't know how to fill out that application, if you want to transfer, we're going to make it super complicated to figure out how to transfer. So those are the things that we are butting up against. Elizabeth also asked me to talk about just, you know, representation. You know, almost 70% of California undergraduates are Black, Latinx, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native. The inverse is true for what their professors look like. Almost 70% of all professors, you know, at the University of California are white. Women, you would think we've made so much progress. Well, not if you listen to the news lately. But women, still not equally represented at every table in leadership positions in higher education. So those are the challenges that we still have to get at to ensure that every student experience when you get to a campus, that you feel welcomed, supported, that you see yourself amongst your professors, and that in a global economy, you learn from everybody, right? I have as much to learn from Black professors, Asian American professors, white professors, as I do from seeing Latino, Latina professors in front of me, right? So that's some of the work that we'll do. We only have 40 minutes, so I'm gonna stop.
No, thanks, Michele, for opening up and reminding us of that picture and what are the challenges and opportunities still ahead. So Michael, you just released a book, speaking of abundance, titled The Abundant University, Remaking Higher Education for a Digital World. And you say that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a more open, flexible, inclusive, and lower-priced system that can scale to accommodate hundreds of thousands of capable students who are being left behind. That is a very big picture. So unpack it a little bit for us.
Okay, in 5 minutes or less? Yeah, no, and first of all, thanks everybody for coming. This is a really exciting moment I think we have. So the unpacking is, in the book I talk about two things. Number one, we've got a design challenge, and then I think we've got a mission challenge. So let me start with the design challenge. The design challenge is we've designed a system of higher education that makes perfect sense for a world that doesn't exist anymore. So the argument I make is we've designed a system of higher education that assumes three key scarcities. We've got scarcity in the number of seats in the classroom. We've got scarcity in access to the faculty experts, whatever the heck that means. And then we've got scarcity in how you can signal your ability to the job market. And I argue that, if you take those three scarcities as a given, the system follows, right? All the system and all the perversities we find in the system make perfect sense and are almost unavoidable unless we can change those scarcities, right? If scarcity to the seats in the classroom is key, then the powerful universities are going to be the ones that make those seats the most scarce, right? Same for faculty, same for signals, right? The most powerful universities are going to be the ones that get you the highest lift, the highest brand name in the marketplace. The problem is, for the last 500 years, we haven't been able to change those scarcities. What I'm trying to argue in the book is I think we can use digital abundance to really relax those design constraints and create a new system of education that allows us to really challenge some of these assumptions that we've made for so long. We all stood up when we said, do we want a more equitable system? The problem is that universities don't get rewarded for creating equity. And they don't really get rewarded for creating diversity and inclusiveness either. So to ask them to do DEI is actually asking them to do something that the market is not going to reward them for. And it's going to be, we're fighting this uphill battle. What's the solution? The solution, I think, is adopting new technologies to create a new system as an alternative for students to gain access to the classroom, gain access to the professors, and critically, I would argue, gain access to new ways to signal their skills to potential employers.
Great, thank you. Well, let's pick up on that and to this question about these innovations and what's a possibility, because we've got two folks, with us who live and breathe and think about this. And so, Maria, I want to, turn it over to you, and I'll ask you to speak to how ASU has designed for that inclusion. How have you designed for that inclusion to be more accessible? And what do you mean by that? When you've said that, and what does it look like?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. Excited to be here with you today. I know you had many other options, so I appreciate you coming. I'm really excited to be with this esteemed panel. I would say, first and foremost, the charter of ASU itself measures its success by who we include and not who we exclude. So we have explicitly, from a mission standpoint, said we're going to measure our success actually by making sure we include as many learners as possible. So I think that is really crucial. Two, it's who is actually thinking about that inclusion. And so I, too, am a first-generation college student, daughter of immigrants, little trend here in terms of, and yet, when I went through that traditional education system, right? I was 18, I went to Claremont McKenna also because that was the one that gave me most financial aid by $500. And I was like, yes. I couldn't think of how else I would get that extra $500, right? But I think that creating teams with a variety of lived experiences is actually the key to inclusion, because in our team in Learning Enterprise and many people at ASU are first-generation students, are not traditional learners, might have taken a different pathway, right? There's many people in our community that we've designed it so if you're not, you don't meet this criteria at 18, that's it. you don't get another option to go to a research university, at least from ASU's perspective. And so we've created different pathways, but that's only because of the lived experience of the people on the team thinking about the needs and knowing those needs from their own experience. And so I think the ability to create inclusion is also the team that you develop. And then finally, I would say is by rethinking the design seems like a very abstract thing. And yesterday I kind of brought it to life by talking about the self-driving cars. I don't know if, have any of you been on a self-driving car yet?
Some of us are scared.
Yeah. I took a Waymo a month ago, and what really struck me is it was designed exactly like the current car. And you're like, well, why is it designed exactly like the current car when there's no driver? I'm still in the back seat, there's still a front seat. Like, it doesn't make any sense to design it exactly the same. And yet, that's where we're starting. So in many ways, I feel like we're exactly in that same spot in education, right? We have these new tools, but we're still designing for the exact same car, the exact same system, and we have to be like, hey, we have new tools that can now redesign that entire experience to be much more inclusive.
Stephen, before I turn to you, I want you to give us an example, so like the design and like the assets you've leveraged. This for you, Maria, first. This question about, because I love that, as I think that, that gets us all thinking like, oh, okay, what is that design? So then what's the new thing that you are thinking about if it's not that traditional car, so to speak?
Well, so I'll give you an example of what would not have been possible without technology. So ASU has about 140 online degrees. So now we have this amazing set of degrees that we have 90,000 students taking. Then we were like, well, what if ASU came to a local community? And we were able to design a program called ASU Local, which brings ASU to a local community and leverages our online degrees, but creates a cohort model and a holistic support model in our local communities. And right now we have them in California, in Long Beach, opening one at Southwestern College. So they're connected to community colleges so that someone can stay at their local community college and complete their degree. Whenever I talk about the coaches that are with our students, they're like, are they faculty? And I'm like, no. Are they doing just career stuff? I'm like, no, right? And it's these new professionals that have never existed. And we were able to combine the technology with our human-centered approach and literally create a brand new design that no one's ever heard of. And it's actually like, I always use a video to describe it because most people I talk to do not understand that model. And why? Because it's a brand new one that couldn't have existed without technology. So that's one example.
Great, thank you. Stephen, and one of the things I think in this conference that we've all talked about, it's like we can talk a lot about this side, right, education, how we actually need to build it, but we also know it's a pitcher and a catcher, right? And we get signals from employers, and that drives a lot about how we think about value and brand. And I know in your work, you think about that a lot. So I'd love for you to speak how innovation has to include business. Employers are thinking differently about educational brand and acting on that. And so how are you all at Noodle seeing how institutions and employers can partner differently?
Yeah, thank you. And it's always funny to have like the Wednesday morning panel. So I applaud all of you for persevering and actually attending a panel. No, it's interesting. At Noodle we work with over 70 colleges and universities across the globe, and they are all struggling in different ways with how to actually situate their institutions to be more accessible and meet students where they are and kind of where we're going. So we think about it in a little bit of a, higher education has like a gift and a curse kind of complex, right? The brands that have been built in higher education are largely driven by the incredible research and impact, specifically because of faculty, both locally, regionally, nationally. And so what's interesting is we're in this moment where we're so tethered to what has been that it's actually holding institutions back from actually putting together the types of system overhauls that allow them to meet students really where they're going. And so, and employers in the same way. Somebody asked me the other day, do you think about brand when you are hiring people of the institution that they went to? And I think if you all as leaders and hiring managers, the answer is yes, right? So employers are actually tethered to the same, what has been for the last 200-300 years. And we're in this interesting moment where, from a social mobility and access standpoint, we actually think, and we're pushing our universities to think more about what are the actual outcomes, what are the actual competencies that the offerings that you are putting forward are actually going to deliver to students, because I think at some point, employers are going to have to come around to getting away from the brands of the institutions and what are the actual competencies and skills that students are coming with. So then institutions think about, okay, I'm not just offering this course because the market says it wants it, or this degree. I'm actually focusing on the skills that I want our graduates to come out with, and then building according to that. And so I think we're not there yet, but I think as institutions begin to think more about how they're intentional, and so it's funny, we've built, I don't know, like 1,000 courses with our university partners, and the ones that were the least successful in terms of student experience and what the engagement levels were the ones where they didn't want to do a full-on program design with us at the outset. So we're actually understanding how this module in this specific course fits into the actual competency framework you want students to have at the end of the degree. And then we're like fighting with them, right, all along the way around why that's not the case, because we didn't start from that. So and it's funny, the DOE is like, not talked about a lot at this conference, right, in terms of regulation. Nobody wants to talk about it. But we actually, I know it's like third rail, right? Nobody wants to. But the financial value transparency and gainful employment initiatives that are kind of moving through, that are aimed at the for-profits, right, intentionally so. If you actually look at them, we are thinking and trying to push our institutions that are not for-profit to map to those, because what they're really trying to do is make sure that every institution puts forward a thoughtful, skills-based competency approach that's going to map to ROI. And so we're kind of, if we can step away from the brands of what has been and think about where we're going, and I'll just say, I get to go a little bit longer because I was at the end. The intersection between employers and higher education and college and universities around solving problems is, I think, something that is everybody talks about employer-university relationships, and so we're trying to put out some initiatives. Think about the nursing shortage, for example, right? Everybody talks about the nursing shortage. Well, if you talk to nursing schools, which we do a lot, they're not really excited about scaling their nursing programs because of faculty and clinical placement issues, but you've got health systems who are spending gazillions of dollars in terms of replacing nurses and trying to keep up. And so what we've done is tried to think about, okay, well, we've got health systems that want to hire nursing graduates. We've got nursing schools that don't want to scale. If we introduce a bank, so we've got some banking partners who are actually funding students to attend nursing schools, the employers and the health systems are agreeing to hire those students at no cost to the student as long as they work for 3 years, right? But that, when we talk to nursing schools about that, you would think that we were like asking them to work in a different galaxy, right? So I just think, so it's an uphill battle, but that kind of innovation and the kind of thinking about what students are being put, opportunities are being put in front of them, I think is how we redesign the system going forward.
Can I jump in particularly on brand and put on my marketing professor hat for a second? Like, why do we use brands? We use brands because we don't have good information about the objective quality of the product. And so I was thinking about this one day, how do we apply this to education, right? So these brands are these long-lasting things, and I had this big question mark on my whiteboard. How do we reduce the brand in higher education? And later that day, I was buying a really expensive scanner from a manufacturer I'd never heard of before, solely because it had a 4.9 star rating on Amazon and a bunch of positive reviews. So I was like, oh, that's how you change brand. You add in information about quality. We haven't solved this yet in higher education, but I would love for us to create new ways for our students to signal that I have this skill that don't involve spending $250,000 in 4 years on my campus. That's the problem we really desperately need to solve, but to change this system.
Right. Well, and the objective you measure, it reminds me of, I had a conversation with the chancellor at UCLA. Now, UCLA Health is constantly opening locations all over Los Angeles, and no one is like, oh, that must be like a worse hospital because they just opened another site. Yet on the UCLA campus, well, we can't really expand because this is the only capacity I have. I'm like, you're running two exact systems, and in one, you're very happy to scale and it has no effect on brand, and yet on the higher ed side, they just think about it differently. So part of it is mindset. I don't think that those brands will be diminished by more inclusion.
Yeah, I love that point because I worry about the fact that, then we say, let's open it up, but we're only going to open up these other options that are not high brand value, that are not high market value to low income, poor kids that are Black and brown.
Yeah, what's interesting, our affinity with brand is also what hurts institutions because they're actually thinking about competing outside of their brand schema, right? And so we end up counseling a lot of institutions out of, no, you're not gonna Google market your way spend out of the brand framework that you're in. The right answer is to think about how you can deliver greater value going deeper into the academic offerings and the competencies and skills, and then using that to connect with the employers that are interested in your graduates because of whatever brand you do have. But it's a cycle, and I think we're in a moment where I think students are going to actually be the ones that push universities to actually think differently.
And I do think that in a digital world, quality is actually measured differently, and we haven't, as an industry, really understood that yet, right? So analog world, everyone wants like the boutique bread, not Wonder Bread, right? Like you want the boutique thing. In digital world, would you rather buy on Amazon or a mom and pop website? You're like, well, I'm pretty sure the Amazon website is higher quality, right? Because it needs the scale to provide the quality. And so in education, I think we're seeing a shift where the quality of a course, take our universal learner courses, is actually increased by the higher amount of students that are taking that course, because now we have data on the types of questions they're asking, where they're dropping out, whereas in a normal analog course, you don't know until the end of the semester whether someone learned anything. And we're able to know right away, oh, this course, people didn't finish their homework and they're not doing that well. And so the ability to drive outcomes in a digital world is much higher, and we haven't made that transition yet in higher education.
Well, and I would argue we haven't made that transition because we're desperately trying to protect the brand, which is key to our current value proposition. So my research is on how new technologies change market power and change industry structure. And so I teach disruptive change. And if you teach disruptive change well, it's really depressing, because the answer to every good case study is, and the incumbent died, right? And if you teach it really well, somebody in the back of the class is going to ask, so can you give me an example of any industry that's responded well to technological change? And the answers are industries that have a strong sense of mission. Right? That when you have this change, the industry initially and reflexively says, I want to protect my business model. It's the industries who can then pivot and say, no, actually, I want to fulfill my mission. And the mission is so important to me that I'm willing to blow up the model if that's what's needed. And so the question that I've been asking to my colleagues in higher education is, what's our mission, friends? If our mission is helping rich kids get a leg up in the job market, we're doing great, But that's not our mission. If our mission is creating all of these things we're talking about, we're failing, and we're failing miserably. Are we passionate enough about that mission that's going to allow us to pivot? So far, it's the rare university that's passionate enough about that mission.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is I think that what gets missed in the drive towards how to make higher education more accessible, more affordable, is actually the inclusion of faculty in the conversation. A lot of the initiatives that we see at our university partners tend to be administrator top down, as opposed to bringing faculty around the table to get at that point of what is our mission, how do we actually drive against it and leverage that, because shocker, faculty kind of run universities in a lot of ways, and so to do anything without bringing them into the conversation, I think is flawed from the start. So the institutions that have brought faculty in have had more success in our experience.
You know, I wanted a facilitator's prerogative because, you know, as a private philanthropy in California, one of the things that we talk about is we center the learner. What does a learner need? What does a learner want? So listening and looking at all the data of the, you know, the dropping enrollment in community colleges, what does that mean for our Cal State system? UC's, don't worry, as much other conversation. But the reason I bring it up is because what we're sitting is in a both and, in a reality of the scale exists with our public institutions. It's where folks like us started. For many of us, Cal States are the biggest producer of a BA in California. They are our driving machine. You know, they really drive that mobility. And to this conversation, they move slowly. And it's really hard to change. And, you know, there's some that are saying, yes, we need to reimagine some of our offerings. We need to re-engage the 25 to 50-year-old, you know, almost, you know, 6 million in California. So I guess what I wonder is, you know, as we're, you know, reaching the end, but have this conversation is the scale exists with our public systems. It is a public good. Many of us are really dedicated that they continue to serve that, but what does it take to create that change? I was thinking about what you're saying, Stevie, you know, bringing in faculty. For others, they would say that's part of the challenge, but I know that's a big question, but I do think for many of us who are thinking about that scale is how do you change it? How do you begin to drive that?
I felt like that might have been directed at me. For others, that's part of the problem. As somebody who has advanced a lot of policy work where we have fought faculty, organized union faculty in particular, on a lot of innovations that actually have been led by faculty. So I'll share an example. So maybe I won't share an example because I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to kind of highlight that it is as important to have state policymakers aligned with your mission and vision, right, and help influence, and faculty hate that. They don't want anybody, they don't want the governor involved, they don't want legislators involved, and yet let me tell you, there would not be more access for students to college-level courses at community college had we not organized to make legislation to make that happen. There would not be better transfer pathways in California without us organizing the legislature and the governor and making that happen. So we talk a lot about all the things that are good for students, and we don't do most of the things that we already know are good for students. We do research all of the time. We are just lifting up the things we already know work, and we've got to secure the resources for them. You gave a great example about nursing schools. Well, states often don't want to pay for what it costs to develop and fund more nurses, right? And then faculty don't want to give up, like, well, we have to offer these general ed courses, which is fair, right? We have to have a balance. So I think it's just being honest about we have to push for the kind of funding to support colleges and universities to do this work. We have to leverage federal funding when we can. We have to engage more closely with the private sector, which we never do. And we have to make sure that in doing all of that, we talk about what makes so many people uncomfortable. How is this working for a growing, diverse America? How does it support the growing Latino majority in this state? Because if you care about California and you want to grow old here, and you don't care about Latinos being undereducated in this state, then when you grow old here, it's not going to be a great place to be.
So as the faculty member here, I will just say everything you've just heard is 100% true. We're the problem. Over and over again in talks to faculty, the degree of anger that comes back at the idea of change is startling. We're in this delightful little bubble here, but you walk outside this bubble and there's a lot of anger about change. And I've tried to position this as, what are our values as faculty? Let's get those up on the board. And then, are we able to achieve those values within the existing system? And the answer is no. I remember one particular talk where somebody said, Mike, what we know, a labor economist, Mike, what we know from the data is that the best way to become wealthy later in life is to get a 4-year college degree, so what you're talking about doesn't make any sense. And my response was, you're absolutely right, that's what the data shows. The best way to become wealthy is to get a 4-year degree. What I can also tell you is the best way to get a 4-year degree is to be wealthy. And when you put those two things together, we've created a terrible system that is absolutely at odds with our values. How do we break that cycle?
And I think, Mike, the centering on the values is really critical. I might disagree and say that ASU, it's our faculty driving all this innovation. And why, it goes back to your point, aren't centering on mission. The fact that our charter states that we are going to focus on inclusion means that it sparked the creativity of all our faculty to say, well, how might we design for that, right? And that, I think the acknowledgement of the diversity means we have to understand that students need different things, right? So the average age of our online students is 28. And I remember this video that the biochemistry faculty actually made because some of our students were applying to medical school and they weren't being admitted because you went to an online program, you must not have leadership skills. And so what we did is we filmed, who are these students? And it was like 30-year-old ex-Navy SEAL. It was like a 10-year, 1,000-person manager at Walmart who wanted to move their careers forward and shift. And it's like, well, no, not everyone is 18 and needs a residential experience. That doesn't mean that that shouldn't be accessible as well. But when you design for just one population, you are missing so many ways to be creative in the pedagogy and the approach of the various needs that people have.
So it's funny, Michael, I will say that faculty are not the problem. Faculty present the opportunity to actually drive the change, right? And so I think inviting them to the table, I think the perception of faculty being the problem, in my opinion, and the way we think about it at Noodle, is because it's being done to them, whatever it is, as opposed to having them be at the table to sculpt how that institution moves forward. So I would apologies if I said it that way.
Good reframing,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But what's interesting about, to your question, Elizabeth, education, higher education has been done kind of the same way for like 300 years. Or 1,000. But the kind of U.S. Constitution of higher education has been largely the same since the birth of a lot of the college universities that we all went to and so on and so forth. In the last 20 years, right, it's kind of gotten flipped on its head at the same time that we had some level of societal wokeness about access being important. And then it got flipped again on its head in the last 4 years. And so from a company perspective, you kind of think about this in the arc of the growth of different companies and organizations. We're in a long game here, right? There's a lot of angst around where we are right now, but we're talking about centuries and centuries of brand establishment and process and all of those things. I think we're on the foothills of the trajectory that we're going to need to drive forward. So you can't, as much as we want it to change tomorrow, right? It's these kind of conversations and the pushing that will actually set us up, but it's not going to be, we're going to come back to GSV next year and we've solved all these things. No, there'll be a lot of students that don't even have financial aid packages, right, when we come back next year. So I think it's a work in progress, and not to get discouraged by where we are at this moment, just thinking a little bit broader in timeline perspective.
That's a really great, I think, wrap up. So as I'm staring at this 1 minute and a little over 1 minute, but just rapid fire, then what should we pay attention to next, given this moment we're in? The change is here. Others are coming onto the market. We need to be more expansive. What should we be paying attention to?
I'm gonna start super negative so you all could take it to a better place.
Stephen will reframe it.
Please, I'm gonna really need the reframe on this one, but higher education is under attack in this country. The value of higher education is under attack. And yet we know that for most folks that aren't wealthy, higher education is the only path to actually being able to adequately survive in this nation. So that is absolutely, to me, the single most important issue. We are attacking the value of higher education. Our entire democracy is fundamentally at threat because those two are linked.
I would sort of reinforce that, right? The conclusion of mine in the book, like there's this really interesting question of why hasn't this changed, right? We've had the technology for at least 15 years. Why haven't we seen the change? My conclusion is that it's still the case that the best way to get, access to the professional job market is to have a four-year degree. Until we change that, I don't think we're going to see meaningful change in the rest of the system.
Well, I'm going to say that we need to redefine what higher education means. Whenever you ask anyone whether they need to continue learning, no one says no. So when people are questioning the value of higher education, what they're questioning is, do we need an expensive, rigid 4 years? And like, if you can't do that, then you don't get higher education. If we are more broadly talking about how do you actually create educational access, I think we could get a lot more people on board. So I think it's up to us as universities to create that more inclusive conversation.
All right, Maria. Let's focus on the word attack for a minute, right? Higher education is under attack. If you think about moments in your lives when you've been attacked, what was your response to that, right? Did you actually lock arms with the attacker, right, and create a harmonious, so I think you're right, higher education is under attack, and it should be in the respect of how important it is to actually students and social mobility. But I think, the way we try to approach it, the right answer is to move out of the mode of attacking and move to the mode of collaboration, right? Like, you're not gonna move higher education in the ways it needs to by attacking. It's how do we come together and figure out what the right paths are, because there's not one solution. So that, I don't know if that's enough of a reframe, but that's
I think I was speaking that the value of higher education is being attacked. I attack institutions all the time when
Trust
I
me,
push
she
for
does.
policies and
we
change.
partner together. No, but I think it makes me think about the beginning of this panel, which was about abundance. And it is not about scarcity. And attacks come when you're fighting for scarce goods. We are all here because we're looking for abundance. So I don't think we need a revolution of ideas. We're all in it. We need to quote my favorite, organizer, Grace Lee Boggs, we need a revolution of ideas and of our values. And if what we're putting forth are values around inclusion, diversity, and equity, I'm going to say those words because that's what drives the democracy and greater shared economic mobility, well, then that's what we need to do, and that's what we heard today. So thank you to our panel. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Thank you.